The man stood quietly in the narrow room, the notebook still in his hand. For several seconds he didn't move. He simply listened. The house around him was silent. No footsteps, no shifting inside the walls. Nothing except the faint sound of air moving through the vent that opened into his bedroom. He stepped closer to it. Without the metal grate, the vent had become a small rectangular opening between the hidden room and the bedroom wall. From inside the space, the view was clear. His bed, the dresser, even the doorway leading into the hallway. Someone standing here could watch almost everything happening in that room, and they would remain completely invisible from the other side. He crouched slightly and aimed the flashlight deeper along the wall. That's when he noticed something else. Just beside the vent was a tiny circular hole in the drywall. It had been drilled carefully, no larger than the width of a pencil. From inside the hidden room, the hole aligned perfectly with the center of the bedroom. He leaned forward and looked through it. The perspective was different from the vent, more focused, more deliberate. From that tiny opening, someone could watch the bed without being noticed. The realization settled in slowly. The mattress on the floor, the empty cans, the notes describing his daily routine, all of it suggested the same thing. Someone had been living inside this hidden room, and they had been watching him. The question that followed was unavoidable. How long had they been there? And more importantly, were they still inside the house? He stepped backward and looked around the room again. The flashlight beam moved across the floor, across the chair, across the scattered cans. Everything looked still, but the dust pattern suggested the space hadn't been abandoned long ago. Some areas showed faint marks where shoes had pressed into the surface. Other sections looked recently disturbed, as if someone had walked there not very long before he opened the hidden door. He slowly stepped back into the hallway. Then he closed the concealed panel behind him. For several minutes he stood there, staring at the wall, trying to decide what to do next. Eventually, he picked up his phone and called the police. 2 officers arrived at the house later that evening. The man explained everything as clearly as he could. The noises in the wall, the measurements that didn't match the blueprint, the hidden panel in the hallway. At first, the officers seemed cautious. Old homes sometimes contain strange architectural features, storage spaces, maintenance gaps, forgotten crawl areas. But once the man showed them the concealed door, their expressions changed. One of the officers used a flashlight to examine the edges of the panel more closely. The door had been constructed carefully, wooden framing concealed behind drywall, paint layered evenly across the surface. The design was intentional. Someone had built the panel specifically to hide the room behind it. The officers opened the door and stepped inside. Their flashlights moved slowly across the interior. They examined the mattress, the cans, the chair. One of them picked up the notebook. They flipped through several pages silently. The hallway outside remained quiet while they inspected the space. After several minutes, they stepped back into the hallway. One of the officers asked the man how long he had been living in the house. 3 weeks, he answered. The officer nodded slowly. Then he said something that stayed with the man afterward. He explained that the room itself was likely very old. It might have been built decades earlier for storage or as part of some forgotten renovation. But the items inside the room told a different story. The mattress wasn't ancient. The cans were modern brands, and the dust pattern suggested recent movement. The officer believed someone had been using the room not long before it was discovered. They searched the rest of the house carefully, every closet, every window, every possible entry point, but no one was found. The officers also checked the attic and the crawl space beneath the house. Both areas were empty. Eventually, they finished their inspection and returned to the living room. One officer explained that there was no immediate evidence showing who had been inside the hidden room, but it was possible someone had found access to the house while it was empty before the man moved in. They suggested changing the locks and installing cameras. Before leaving, they collected the notebook as evidence. The man watched as the officers stepped outside into the quiet street. The red and blue lights from their vehicle reflected briefly across the windows before fading into the darkness. After they drove away, the house felt very different. Not louder, Not more active, just quieter. The kind of silence that makes every small sound stand out. That night, the man barely slept. Every creak of the floor made him sit up and listen. Every shifting sound from the structure made him look toward the hallway. Morning eventually came, but the feeling inside the house never fully returned to normal. Within 2 weeks, he decided to move out. The man packed his belongings slowly. Furniture was moved out first, then the boxes. By the final day, the house had returned to the same empty state it had been in before he arrived. The walls were bare again, the rooms quiet. Before locking the front door for the final time, he walked down the hallway once more. The concealed panel still blended perfectly with the rest of the wall. Without knowing where to look, most people would never notice it. He opened the hidden door one final time. The room looked the same as before. The mattress remained on the floor. The chair still faced the wall. But one thing was different. The notebook that the officers had taken was no longer there. That part made sense. What didn't make sense was what he saw lying at the exact same spot where the notebook had been. Another notebook. Thinner, darker cover. He was certain it hadn't been there before. He stepped inside the room slowly. The air felt heavier than he remembered. He picked up the notebook and opened it. Only one page had been written. One sentence. Short, carefully written in the same neat handwriting as the first notebook. The message said, "He found the room." The man stared at the page for a long time, because he knew something the police didn't. The first notebook had been taken away days earlier, which meant whoever wrote this new message had entered the hidden room again, after the investigation, after the police had searched the house, after he thought the space was empty. He closed the notebook slowly, then he stepped out of the hidden room and shut the concealed panel for the final time. The house was quiet, but as he walked toward the front door, one thought stayed with him. The person who had been living inside the wall knew the room was discovered, and somewhere nearby, they might still be watching.